Yeah, good morning, students. We continue with the Napoleonic Code, which we had studied yesterday. So, we studied what we saw yesterday was that Napoleon introduced a system of meritocracy whereby now people would be acknowledged for their skills and the talents that they had, and that's what would give them positions within the French society and not in the family that they would be born in. If the family was influential and rich or was politically well connected, they would be having all the privileges and they would have all the positions. That was the earlier system, but not anymore under Napoleon. And one of the very important things that Napoleon opened to everyone was that for the first time now the common people, the poor people, they could now have property, the right to property. Okay, now right to property, that included land. Now you have to understand that in all the societies at that during those 18th centuries or 17th century or 16th or 15th, those were the times when every land within the kingdom was considered to be the king's property. And it was not just that in France that it was so, it was in all parts of Europe, and not just in Europe, even in India. Even in India, every land which was there within the geographical boundary of India, and it was under the influence of the Mughal emperor, every piece of land was considered to be owned by the Mughal emperor. If the nobility had that land, a proportion of land, if the farmers had that land, they were there only as long as they could rather do business and use those lands only as long as the Mughal emperor, it was considered to be as long as the pleasure of the Mughal emperor. He could snatch away that piece of land whenever he wished. So now for the first time under Napoleon, the common people could afford property. And not just that, you have to understand one very important thing. After a, a, a nation full of people who have always been under great amount of poverty, a nation full of people who never had any privileges, who had no rights, now they were suddenly free. Right? For generations, they had been living their lives for the fulfillment of the nobility, the clergy, and their life meant nothing. Now suddenly they were free. Now they could think about themselves. Now they could make their own plans. What to do with my own life? What do I plan for my child? Now, suddenly, the people in French society, that is the poorest of the poor in French society, they could now have those dreams. Now, once you have those dreams, naturally, all of us, it's a human nature to dream of better days. None of us dream of bad days. We all want better things in life. And Napoleon actually opened the doors for a lot of trading associations within France, which earlier were only the prerogative of the aristocracy and the very rich businessmen of France. Now, what are these trading guilds? That is, guild is a word which is a word from the world of commerce. It is not there normally you would see in other subjects of life. Guild is normally used in the world of commerce, and it means trading association. Now, different, like for example, a cloth merchant would be a member of a trading guild, which is only about the business of cloth, or people who would be dealing in grains. They would be members of the trading guilds, which are primarily about the food grain items. So all this earlier used to be the sole prerogative of the people who were very rich, people who were very affluent, people who came from the nobility. Now all that was suddenly open to the common businessmen, the small-time traders, the small-time businessmen of France. And So there was a lot of buzz happening in France and in the French society. But as we had studied yesterday, that the situation for the situation or the trouble or the life which the people of different parts of Europe were rather leading the same kind of life of subservience and the life of poverty. The revolution had happened in France, but not in the other parts of Europe. So the peasants, the poor people in those different societies in Europe were again leading the same kind of life which people of France had been leading till very, very recently. Now, Napoleon wanted to bring about these advantages and wanted to introduce these advantages in different parts of Europe, and he took his ideas to different parts of Europe. But as we had studied yesterday, that definitely there would be resistance from the established setup, and Napoleon had to fight that. Now, in the early days, everything went on well, but Napoleon realized that it was his army, it was the French army, which was trying to bring about changes in different parts of Europe. It was the French money that was getting spent. It was the French soldiers that were dying, whether in the battlefields of Italy or in the battlefields of Poland, but where he wanted to bring about, or in the Austrian Empire, where he wanted, in Holland, where he wanted to bring those changes. But then it was his people, his soldiers who were dying, because naturally they would have resistance from the kings of those areas and those provinces. So Napoleon understood that this was not the best of strategies. So the areas where his people, his army actually started occupying, Napoleon started introducing his own system of taxes, and he started the system of forced conscription. Now, what is conscription? Forced conscription, rather. Forced conscription is when you when you compel the young people of a particular country to join the national army. That is forced conscription. Conscription is just about, you can, it's voluntary. You enroll people to join your national army, like it happens when everyone joins it, like it happens in the modern state of Israel. But then when it is forced conscription, would be like, to give you an example, like the government of India suddenly saying that everyone in India, every family would now have to give out one man to join Indian army. Say if you want to become a doctor, the government of India compels you to join the Indian army. So that was forced conscription. Now, because Napoleon realized that he needed more and more men to fight in different parts of Europe and to bring about those revolutionary changes which he actually aspired to bring. But that was not going to be easy, which he realized, and because of that, he started introducing higher taxes. He started censorship. Now, yes, again, this very important term. What is censorship? Now, censorship is essentially, it is something which is introduced by the government of any particular place, which whereby the government does not allow you, or rather, let me put it this way, the government only, you would get to know about the world around you or about the country around you only what the government wants you to know. You would come to know only what the government wants you to know. It is not that you would have access to unlimited amount of information. Definitely not. And if you remember that those were the times during the 17th century and 18th century when the printing press had already been invented. If you printing press, if you remember the date, I don't know if how many of you do, but printing press was something which was invented in Germany in 1439 by Gutenberg. Now, in the earlier times, that is before printing press was invented, it was very easy to control information by the rulers, because there would be someone, because it would be the palace that would be the source of all that information, what the people would be having access to. But now, after the invention of printing press, anyone could float his ideas. Anyone could choose to agree with you. Anyone could choose to disagree with you. People could now have magazines. People could now have newspapers. So when Napoleon started going about with his increase in taxation, forced conscription, then naturally there had to be resistance from those societies. Now, the resistance of the societies, that got manifested through newspapers, through pamphlets, because the printing press had already been invented. Now anyone could print whatever he wished to. Right now, Napoleon severely cracked down on this, where the newspapers were now, and the magazines would not now print whatever they wished, or to put it simply, whatever was the reality. They had to conform to what the what the French government, led by Napoleon Bonaparte, wanted them to conform to, and they could only now print what the French government wanted them to print. Yes. So there's another topic in this, that the aristocracy and the new middle class. Now this is a very interesting topic, where the aristocracy and the new middle class. Now, what was aristocracy? Aristocracy in those years, and even for that matter, even today, it generally meant people with old money. You know, their fathers had been rich, grandfather has been rich, and great-great-grandfather rich, because this is you have inherited all this wealth. You haven't created it on your own. So that was, and the people who were part of that select group of people were known as a part of aristocracy. And naturally, because you were in the position of so much of wealth and power, so naturally you had access to the privileges, and you had access to the king. You would become the minister, you would become the judge. That's how the world went in those days. But now one thing which something interesting was coming up, and which was the industrial revolution. Okay, now industrial revolution was a whole epoch-making event. Now, what is the epoch-making event? An event which would transform the world forever. The Industrial Revolution, which took roots in England around 16th century, and then it crossed English Channel, and then it entered mainland France. Now, what happens when you have an Industrial Revolution? Earlier, there were only two select group of people, either the aristocrats, that is the rich and the super rich, and which would be normally through agriculture. All their wealth would be from that one source, which would be agriculture. 80% or 90% of the economy would be about agriculture, people dealing in agriculture. But now a new middle class was created, whereby you do not have to, you could now create factories, you could now create businesses, which was about machinery. Now you did not have to now depend on Mother Nature for all the money that you would have. Now you could create things on your own. Now you do not have to look at the weather gods and always depend on agriculture. So this created a new middle class, whereby the engineers were being created, lawyers started coming up, the workers who used to work in those factories were much well paid, because they did not have to depend on the rains and all those kind of things. So they could just create things, sell it in the market, and make money. Okay, thank you.